Hi everyone. So we're going to get started. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And we ask that you silence your cell phones for this event. And if you haven't already purchased a book, they are available in the back. So if you wanted to grab one of those after the event, you are more than welcome to. So I'm just going to do a quick little intro for you guys. So tonight we have Bianca Marais, and she's the author of Hum If You Don't Know the Words, and If You Want to Make God Laugh. Before she started writing, she started a corporate training company and volunteered with Kotlands. She now teaches creative writing at the same place where she received her certificate for creative writing, the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. We are so excited to have her here tonight. Please welcome Bianca. And we also have Jennifer Blankline. She's a book reviewer and a freelance marketing consultant. She graduated from Lehigh University with a psychology degree and has a background in advertising. Before moving to book blogging, Jennifer had edited a local small business newsletter. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here. And I'll now turn it over to Mrs. Zodwa. Thank you.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming out in support. It really means so much to me to have all of you here. I know some of you traveled very far. There's amazing booktopians here. And readers who have always been fans of Hum. Pamela, your support has just been phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming out and for everything. For forcing the book on so many people. And for all the book bloggers here tonight as well, thank you so much. The Bookstagrammers, the support's amazing. Those of you who've seen me at an event at Booktopia know that I begin every event with a video that I put on social media. And I do ask you to try and look enthusiastic, even if someone dragged you out here and you really don't want to be here. And also, if you're on the run from the law, now would be a good time to duck out somewhere. I will start here and go across, and if you just kind of wave, that would be awesome. Oh, again, that's awful. You're all too quiet. Let's try this again.
We weren't ready.
Okay, you're all ready now. Okay. Pretend I'm Barry Manilow, Pamela.
I don't know who you are.
What? Okay, maybe not for all of you. Totally. For Pamela, Barry Manilow. For the rest of you, somebody else. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yay! We'll take it. We'll see it. Thank you so much. Okay, here we go.
Okay, so let's get started here. You all right? Yeah. Okay.
I meant to do that.
So Bianca, you grew up in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about your years, your younger years.
Right, so born in 1976, which obviously was the year that the Soweto uprising happened in South Africa. Hugely pivotal moment in South Africa's history. It was one of the catalysts that led to the end of apartheid. There were many catalysts that led to the end of apartheid. There were sanctions against South Africa. There was South Africa not being allowed to play in the Rugby World Cup. And I say, if you want to motivate men to do anything, take their sport away from them. And that's what happened in South Africa. And all these travesties were taking place in South Africa in 1976. But my life was blissfully wonderful because I was being taken care of by a black caregiver called Eunice Ngogodo, who is just an absolute angel. She helped raise me, she helped me with my homework, she helped me with ballet recitals and school plays. Even though she was never allowed to sit in an auditorium of white people ever to watch me participate in any of these things. And when Eunice was, hold on, it's easy for me to say, when I was 13, Eunice had a vicious heart attack when she found out that her 6-year-old grandchild had been brutally murdered. And this was one of the most pivotal moments in my life, this memory of her heart attack. Because the whole time that I was raised in South Africa, as a child, I was brainwashed into being racist. This is what regimes like apartheid, this is what they do. They get children super young and they try and turn them into racists. And I was always told that black people don't feel things like we as white people do. That, they're not as human as we are. And here was Eunice with her grandchild dying, and Eunice's heart literally broke from the pain of it. And when Eunice went on to retire, her daughter Millicent came to work for our family. And after many years, when I was 24, Millicent passed away from HIV/AIDS related complications. And so much of this book is about the onset of the AIDS pandemic in South Africa. I volunteered in Soweto, which is South Africa's largest urban black settlement, with HIV/AIDS orphans and their caregivers during the worst of the AIDS pandemic. So much of my background has informed both of my novels. Come If You Don't Know the Words, which was my first novel, which is about a young girl and her relationship with her caregiver. And then this novel as well, which has the backdrop of the AIDS pandemic, Nelson Mandela's presidency, and then Archbishop Desmond Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So these are all my background that very much informs my writing. And that is a very long answer to a very short question.
Very interesting. Definitely interesting. Now, this new book, If You Want to Make God Laugh, starts out in a squatter camp. Did you go there? Did you interview people there? How did you learn about this?
Right. So this particular squatter camp, and just for you to understand the terminology, so the euphemistic word for a squatter camp is an informal settlement. But really it's squatters who live there. They live in tin shacks. They make these shacks out of whatever scrap metal they can find, out of cardboard. And they put these homes together, and they're meant to be temporary homes, but for these desperately poor people, these are their permanent homes. And so they are throughout South Africa. The poorest of the poor live in these squatter camps, and there's quite a few of them in Soweto and around Johannesburg. And so when I started volunteering in Soweto, there were places that had homes throughout Soweto, but the very poor places where most of the AIDS orphans lived were in these squatter camps. So for 10 years, I went in and out of these squatter camps, speaking to the grandmothers who had had all of their children pass away from HIV/AIDS related illnesses, and were suddenly in their old age. They were supposed to be retiring, they were supposed to have their children looking after them, and they were supposed to see their children, who they had worked a lifetime for, during apartheid. These women had worked as maids, they'd labored, and they were hoping that one day apartheid would end and that their children would have these phenomenal futures. And suddenly apartheid ends, and not only are their children passing away from the pandemic and not having the futures that they want, these women are left to care for very sick grandchildren. So I spent 10 years in and out of South Africa squatter camps. Some of the booktopians know that one of the men that I worked very closely with in one of these squatter camps in the charity that I was volunteering with turned out to be a serial killer of young girls. He killed, raped and murdered 4 young girls before he was found out. And he used these squatter camps as his hunting grounds, because we're better to be a predator than somewhere where these young girls are so desperately poor, their parents can't properly look after them, and they will pretty much do anything for an income for their family.
Okay, now you have 3 strong women telling their stories in this book. Who inspired you, and are they written after anybody that you know?
So Zodwa is a young Zulu girl. She's 17 years old. She's a black girl living in one of the squatter camps. And she is a composite of all the black women that I volunteered with in Soweto during those very formative years. She's pregnant. We know she doesn't want to be pregnant. We don't know how she became pregnant. But she's just such a strong person despite her circumstances. So she's a little bit of everything. And I like to say to people that as writers, we are like literary magpies. You know, we go out into the world, and some people just have these shining souls. They're just these shining, shining individuals. And as writers, we get to steal these best bits of people and incorporate it into our little nest, which is our novel. So Zodwa was a bit of everybody. Ruth is this very interesting character. So she's an exotic dancer, which really means stripper. And she's a socialite, and she's going through her third divorce. And I think we all know people like this, who just say whatever comes into their head. You know, they just kind of live out loud with their heart on their sleeve. And Ruth is some of the people I know, but her background is based on a real person in South Africa. There was an exotic dancer in South Africa in the 70s called Glenda Kemp, and she used to dance naked with a python. Oh. Yeah, the snake thing is like, oh. But what fascinated me about Glenda is how, you know, to be a woman in South Africa in the 70s, and you were going up on stage and taking your clothes off when the apartheid government was so brutal that they arrested people and people disappeared for no reason pretty much. And she was really interesting in that she was super creative, because the laws in South Africa at the time said that you can never leave the stage wearing less clothes than you were wearing when you got on the stage. And this was supposed to stop women from being strippers. But all Glenda did was, she got up on the stage wearing all these clothes, took them off, danced with the snake, and then as part of her act, she put her clothes back on. And then she left the stage wearing the exact amount of clothes she was wearing when she got on, which I found super fascinating. And then Delilah is an excommunicated nun. She's someone who has a very damaged past. She's a very closed-off, damaged person. And, you know, these days we talk about the Me Too movement. We talk about women talking about sexual assault and things that have happened to them, and women are standing up against it these days. But sexual assault is not a new thing. It's not just something that started a few years ago. This goes back hundreds of years. So Delilah was my love letter to women who've lived through hideous pasts and have come out stronger on the other side.
Wow. Who do you identify with the most out of those?
If I say the stripper, will you judge me? I identify with all of my characters. Each of my characters is a bit of me. I mean, in my first book, I wrote about a parrot. A parrot was a secondary character, and that parrot is a bit of me. And in this book, each of the characters is a bit of me. There's some of the good, there's some of the bad, there's some of the ugly. But I think as writers, that's what we're doing. We're exploring ourselves, we're exploring people that we know and love in these interesting ways. So I can honestly say that every character is a bit of me, and every character is not me at all. So, yeah.
Now in Hum, you had two characters, and it was alternating. And now in this new book, you have three characters. What was that like? Did you make a plan like you were going to add a third character, and was it much more difficult?
Yeah, so the first novel, I thought two characters was going to be difficult, especially since the two characters were told from the first person. And one of the character was a black Xhosa woman, so an experience very, very different to my own. And of course, when I was writing it, I was very aware of the appropriation debate. I definitely did not want to appropriate a voice that wasn't my own. And so I approached that, you know, very, very carefully, doing a lot of research to be able to tell that voice. But I was able to do two first-person narratives. And with this book, suddenly there were three female protagonists who came to me, three very strong women who were damaged in certain ways, but who triumphed over that and took their life back. And it was very challenging writing three different perspectives. And I know as a reader myself, when I'm reading three different characters and I'm not quite sure which character's which when I start the chapter, it takes me out of the story. So with this particular book, I wrote two characters in the first person because Ruth's voice is so easy. She's a potty mouth. She's kind of irreverent. She just says whatever the hell she wants, so she was fun to write. Delilah is so closed off emotionally and so damaged that her voice was much more challenging to write. But Zodwa, I decided to write in the third person, and I've gotten a bit of criticism because of that. I got a review that was awful, and they said that I wrote Zodwa in the third person because as a white woman, I saw Zodwa as less than my white characters, which was extremely, extremely upsetting because I don't mind getting the criticism for writing from a black character's perspective. I feel like this is a discussion we must have, but I definitely did not write her from the third person because I viewed her as less than. It's purely because she's a 17-year-old girl who's had a very sheltered life in the homelands. And so if she wrote in the first person, her voice was not going to be as big and as all-encompassing as I wanted it to be. This character is amazing, and I wanted her to have this huge voice, which is why I wrote her in the third person. But yeah, it had a lot of challenges, and it was interesting to tackle.
It would be interesting to go back and write her now in the first person, because she was such a huge character in the book, and she really did have an equal amount to offer, even though her life was shorter than everyone else.
Right, and I actually did begin writing her in the first person. I don't know how many of you are writers here, Sarah. I know some of us are writers here. And whenever I begin writing a character, I play around with voice. I write them in the third person. I write them in the first person. I write them present tense, past tense, until I feel like the voice is right. So I already did write her in the first person. It just was too limited for this character, and it didn't do her justice. So early drafts of novels are messy. They're all over the place. They're told from so many different perspectives. And this is the way we find our way into a character's head, or at least this is the way I do it. Maybe I'm just not very good at this whole writing thing. That's how I do it.
Did you write this book in order? That's a big question for me, because I love how you have your location and the date and the name of the chapters, the narrator, and the chapters are short. It keeps it very easy for you to process everything that's going on as the reader, so you don't get confused. But as the writer, it's a lot to take on, switching the voices every couple of pages and different times and locations. So how did you do that? How do you organize that?
The way you read it is exactly the way I wrote it. I tell people that my characters are like my imaginary friends. They come to me kind of fully formed. There's things I need to flesh out, like their voice. But they come to me and they whisper in my ear, and they tell me things, and they tell me their story. And as they're doing this, this is how I write the story. And I find that by alternating chapters, we can kind of become immersed with one character's story and get to know them, but we don't get so bogged down that we're not able to move to another character. Because I've read some books where it changes the perspective halfway through the novel, and sometimes that can be quite jarring, because then you've already picked your favorite character. I don't know if you guys do this in books with multiple perspectives. You kind of have a favorite, and the minute it changes, you're kind of annoyed with the author because now they've taken away your favorite person. In terms of, sometimes it was present day and then there were flashbacks, but that's exactly how I wrote it. And that fascinates me too about how writers do that. So I don't know how many of you have read All the Light We Cannot See. This is just amazing. I fell in love with that book so much. And on Goodreads, they had an opportunity for you to ask the author questions. And I asked him that exact question because he was dealing with multiple timelines, different characters. And I said, did you write it in a linear way and then mix it all up afterwards? Or did you write it in that way? And he said, the way you read it is the way I wrote it. And at the time I was like, wow, I can't believe he did that. But then I could understand why he did that.
Look at you.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. One of the things that I love in your book is that I love a good map. I love the beginning, how you have the map, you can put yourself there. And I also like the glossary, because right away there are words, I don't know what you're saying, I need to know, and so instead of having to Google it, it's all right there. So those are great additions to have.
Thank you. And my husband made such fun of me because he reads fantasy novels. So he loves Lord of the Rings, he loves fantasy novels, and whenever he brings a book home, I open the front of the book and I'm like, oh look, a map. And I was like, I will never read a book with a map. And then I wrote this book, and then the map came out, and I didn't even think about it. And he opened the book, and he was like, "Oh look, a map." And yeah, it's just for my readers to orientate themselves in South Africa to figure out where everything is. And with my first novel, I actually did write a glossary of terms, but the publisher didn't include it in the hardcover, which for me was very frustrating because it's awful to have readers say to you, oh, I was busy reading it and I didn't understand this word, so I Googled it. And if you're anything like me, I once started on Wikipedia. I looked up Nelson Mandela, and 3 hours later I was reading about plankton. Nelson Mandela to plankton. I'm not quite sure how that happened. So at least this time there is a glossary of terms, so if you get stuck on a word, go to the back of the book and you can look it up.
Now, this book has so many strong women characters. It's not necessarily classified as a feminist book, but it does represent. Did you think about that when you were writing it? Or did you think about, I'm going to write this book about motherhood? Or did you have a theme, or did it just come out that way?
I never think of the theme when I sit down to write. So writers fall into 2 categories. There are plotters, like J.K. Rowling, who plots out the themes of the novel, who plots out all the characters, what's going to happen in the book. And then you have people like me who they call pantsers, because we fly by the seat of our pants. And so for me, I like to explore characters. I like to explore what motivates them, and they take me places. I never sit and go, these are the themes that I'm going to explore. I think if I did, I would realize I probably explored too many themes, and I would potentially take some of them out. And this is where I love my readers so much, because I just get the words on the page. I don't think about what they mean. And then I have my readers come to me afterwards and say, these were the strong themes. And with How Many People Don't Know the Words, one of the first book clubs I did, I Skyped into this book club, and somebody said to me, this is such a wonderful meditation on motherhood. And I was like, motherhood? This isn't a meditation on motherhood. What are you talking about? And she said, are you kidding me? Of course this is a meditation on motherhood. And she gave me all these examples. And I was like, oh my God, this is a meditation on motherhood. And the same with this book. My readers come to me and they say, I love this theme, and it's not something that I've consciously thought about, but I love that my readers find meaning in it, and then they tell me what the meaning is for them.
So if you start out and you're thinking about your characters, how do you prepare and dig deep into the character before you sit down to write?
I don't. A lot of writers have this amazing questionnaire. It's like 40 pages, and you interview your character, and you ask them their favorite color, and you ask them their earliest childhood memory, and all of these things. And I don't do that. So what I do is I just have a sense of the character, and then I write the first draft. And when I write the first draft, then I really get to know my character. And then I write the second draft, and I get to know them a little bit better, and so it goes. Some of them I know better than others, but it's in the writing that I really get to know them. And this is why I don't like plotting a novel, because the minute I know what's going to happen to these characters, I kind of lose interest in the story, because I'm not exploring it anymore. So I like discovering who they are as I write them. And I never mean to write feminist books. I honestly don't. It's just women are so much more interesting than men. Sorry, sir. Yeah, it's just, I have men in the novels, but they kind of tend to get sidelined because these women are so strong and they're just so amazing, and that's who I tend to focus on.
Now, a vision board.
Yes.
You do a vision board. So what is that for, and how does that help you, and how do you do it?
Right, because there's nothing scarier than the blank page to a writer. You know, every time I sit down to write, that's exactly when I suddenly decide I have to walk my golden retriever or clean the house or something else. So the vision board helps when I sit down in front of my desk and I look up at these characters as I imagine them. And I look up at these settings that I've imagined, and it just helps center me every single time. So in this novel, I pictured Ruth, the ex-stripper, as Debbie Reynolds, a young Debbie Reynolds and an older Debbie Reynolds. And I mean, who's more perfect than Debbie Reynolds? Come on. And okay, maybe who's more perfect than Debbie Reynolds is Dame Judi Dench, who I then based Delilah on. And Zodwa was based, I pictured Lupita Nyong'o, who's just amazing as well. So I have this vision board that it's these little snapshots that I come to, because when I write, I see things very cinematically when I write. I'm in the character's head and I am seeing the world outside of their eyes. I don't see them from above or from in front of them. I see everything playing out and I smell things and I taste things. And so the vision board really helps with that.
Both of these books are separate. They are not really connected, although there are a few characters that appear in the second book that came from the first. Do you have a sequel in mind for either?
Right, so after I wrote Home If You Don't Know the Words, and just to give you some context there, the first draft of Home If You Don't Know the Words spanned 4 decades. And in its current iteration, it spans 1 year and 3 months. So I had to take out 3/4 of a novel and begin again based on feedback that I was getting from publishers. So for me, my first novel, their story is far from over. And after I finished writing it, I began writing the sequel to Home If You Don't Know the Words. And this title, If You Want to Make God Laugh, was actually the title to my sequel. And then my publisher got it and they said, look, we like it, but you need to be a New York Times bestseller before we can publish the sequel. And so I put the book to the side and I began this story. And this story was going to have a completely different title. It was going to be called Shooting Stars and Mason Jars, which I thought was an awesome title. And my publisher said it sounds like an American South romance novel. So they were like, no. And so they stole the title from my sequel. But I hope one day to be able to tell that story because it's far from over. Beauty and Robin make cameo appearances in this book in the 90s. So those of you who enjoyed reading them in home will see them again. And you never know because, I mean, books like Hidden Figures, nobody really knew about that book until it became a film and then suddenly everybody was reading the book. And the book is being considered by a few producers, how many of you don't know the words? So Viola Davis, Charlize Theron. So who knows, maybe one day it'll be up on the big screen and then I get to tell my sequel. And if I don't, I will self-publish it for those of you who are interested. Yeah.
Okay. Your titles are very different than most other books.
Yeah.
They're like phrases or sayings.
Yeah.
How do you come up with that? And do you write the title before, or do you write your book and then you pull it out of the book? How does that come about?
The first title came when there was a scene when Robin was at her parents' funeral and they were starting to sing a hymn and she didn't know the words to it. And she kind of freaked out and her aunt said to her, don't worry, just hum if you don't know the words. And that then stuck in my head. It became the metaphor for the book and I was really lucky to get to keep that title because it's such a metaphor for what those characters are going through. They're floundering, they're just trying to get from one day to the next. It's a fake it till you make it kind of mentality. For this book, there's that saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Or man plans, God laughs. And so I knew that was going to be the title because these 3 characters are making such plans and they're trying so hard to get certain things in their lives going, and yet life has a way of happening when we're busy making other plans.
Woody Allen? Is that from Woody Allen?
Yeah, but I don't want to say Woody Allen.
Okay.
It's that man.
I know.
Yeah.
I googled it.
Yeah.
But it's a great show.
But it's also a Jewish saying. Man plans, God laughs. So I'd rather say it comes from that than Woody Allen.
Absolutely.
So your covers are so amazing. I love your covers. Everyone says don't judge a book by a cover, but hard to not do that. They're so great. Did you have any decision on this?
Yes, I drew them myself. No, I'm just kidding. There's an amazing designer called Caitlin Cole. She designed both of the book covers. Again, as writers, we don't have much say over the titles of our books, and we don't have say over the covers of our books, because marketing departments at the publisher will say, this is your demographic, and we're trying to appeal to this demographic, and so they design it, and you just kind of hope you're going to like it. The one thing I did have to say about on the cover of If You Want to Make God Laugh is this dog. This dog is called Jezebel. And she is throughout the novel from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and she wasn't originally on the cover, and I was like, this is an important character and she needs to be on the cover of this book. And just quickly before we end, some of you will read the dedication, which is to my husband, and in the dedication I apologize for Sodom and Gomorrah. And I just want to explain this to you because my husband is going around telling people that I killed puppies, and I did not kill puppies. So Jezebel, in the early draft of this book, had a litter of puppies, 2 of which were called Sodom and Gomorrah. And then when the book got more cumbersome, there wasn't space for the puppies in the book. So I had to take the puppies out of the book. That does not mean I killed the puppies. It just means they became unborn. So don't believe the vicious rumors that you might hear that he's spreading.
So what are you working on now? What can we expect next?
Having said that I don't plot novels, that was a complete lie, because now I've been writing a psychological thriller. So a complete change of genre for me, purely because these 2 novels were like therapy for me. It was like bearing my soul to strangers. Very, very draining, very emotionally draining, very cathartic and very necessary. But I wanted to have some fun after these books, and what's more fun than murder? So that's the book that I have been working on. I wrote the first draft, and now I'm tearing it apart and I'm busy rewriting it. And this is the first time I'm writing from a male's perspective. So this is interesting for me. So there's 2 narrators, one of which is a man. And the current title, and this will probably not happen, is Until Death Do Us Part. This is where you go, ooh. We'll see what it ends up being called.
Is it easier for you to write that book than these?
It's just more fun. You know, there's something about awful people that's kind of fun to write. These people who are just awful and they treat each other awfully, and there's murder and mayhem. Certainly less emotionally taxing, and it's fun for me to suddenly plot a novel. So my other novels, I saw where the characters took me. This novel, I mean, you can't pants a psychological thriller, otherwise your readers are going to be like, what the hell is going on in this book? I don't know what's going on. So there's red herrings, there's twists and turns, so definitely more fun with that.
Okay, and my last question here is, what are you reading? What do you like to read? What do you recommend?
Oh, I read everything, and mostly it's informed by you guys, whether you reviewers, or whether you bookstagrammers or whatever. I look at what the rest of you are reading, and when you rave about a book and you love a book, I go and read it. Something that's frustrating is when I try and tell people to read certain books. These are books that are only going to be coming out next year, because I get advanced reader copies from our publisher, which is awesome. And there are 2 books coming out in January, which I want everybody to read. One is called American Dirt. Yeah, a whole bunch of the Booktopians have read it. It's about a woman in Mexico whose whole family is killed by a drug cartel, and she needs to make her way to the US with her young son to try and protect him from the cartel. And in this political climate, such an important story. And there's another one called Such a Fun Age. That's coming out in January as well. It's about a young African-American woman who is a babysitter part-time, and this family contacts her and says, please will you look after this child we're having a bit of a crisis, and this is late at night, and she leaves her party, goes all the way to fetch this child, takes the child to a store, and when she gets to the store, she's accused of kidnapping this white child. So again, very, very timely story, very important to read. These are the two that I would recommend for next year. But if you follow me on Goodreads, all the books that I read, I list them there. I no longer review books on Goodreads since I became a writer, because I realize how difficult it is, and not everybody's going to love every book. But if I've read it, it's on Goodreads. You can follow there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It was very interesting. And I think we're going to take some questions. Is that right, from you guys? So if anyone has a question.
Yes.
Since you're writing a psychological thriller, are you someone who reads them, or have you been reading them to kind of...
Oh, I have read psychological thrillers since I was too young to be reading psychological thrillers. We were actually saying how wonderful it is now that there's YA, young adults for young people, because when I was a teenager, it was either romance novels, Danielle Steele, or it was like psychological thrillers. So that's always been my guilty pleasure. And I read as a writer, so most of the time I guess what the twist is, I guess what's coming. So for me it's been a real challenge to keep my readers on their toes and not have them guess where the twists and turns are. Yeah?
How are your books received in South Africa?
Good question. It depends on who you speak to. There are some people in South Africa who love the books, who say that it's changed their mindset, that it's really broadened their perspective on what's happening in South Africa. There are other people who feel like I have betrayed white people, that I've thrown white people under the bus, and Afrikaners especially. So, it really depends on who you speak to in South Africa, and both perspectives are fine to me. If we are not, as writers, challenging people, then what are we doing? Yes?
Did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
Good question. So the reason she's asking is in the first novel, well, actually, let me not say, but I did have an imaginary friend, but his name was Uncle Bob. I don't even know, don't even ask me. I'm pretty sure I'm going to need a lot of therapy to work through that, but I did have an imaginary friend. I think a lot of writers do. People just make stuff up all the time, yeah. Yes?
Do you have a vision board for your newest?
I do. I do. I think I actually put it up on Instagram.
I thought I remembered seeing it.
Yes.
But I couldn't remember.
Yes, there is. And Sam Hugan, who's Jamie from Outlander, for those of you who watched the TV show, he's on the vision board, which is why I spend a lot of time staring at my vision board and not writing very much. But yeah, there is one for that. And I kind of pick dresses and different settings and stuff. Yes?
A couple of things. One, did your books write about Biancas Street? I've been to Soweto, so I know the area and I know the history. And also, second point, did your books write about Cape Town, where Mandela was imprisoned?
Yes and yes. So the first novel, The Soweto Uprising, is explored in detail, and a lot of the Soweto Uprising happened in Biancas Street. And for those of you who don't know, Biancas Street is world famous not just for the Soweto Uprising, because it's the only street in the world in which 2 Nobel laureates have lived. So that was Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela. Both lived in Biancas Street. And in the second novel, Ruth's narrative begins in Camps Bay in Clifton, which is in Cape Town. So yeah, these have been explored in the settings, have been explored in the book. And for me, setting in these 2 novels have become character. Because South Africa is so intrinsic to these novels, the setting is so important. In the third book, I actually don't even state where the story takes place, which everybody's going to think this is weird for me. So it's not taking place in South Africa, it's an unnamed North American city, because apparently Americans don't like reading books based in Canada. Yeah, but yeah.
Weirdos.
Any other questions?
Will,
Yes?
will the next book the Putnam as well?
No, it's not a Putnam novel. So Putnam, that my current publisher, publishes more literary fiction, and the next novel is definitely more genre-based fiction. So in the next few months, I'm going to be getting used to a lot of rejections all over again, because this is what we do as writers. We are super sensitive, which is how we become writers in the first place. And then we open ourselves up to criticism and rejection from everybody, which is kind of counterintuitive. But my agent will be submitting to totally different publishers for the psychological thriller.
Will you be prepared after Hum? Because
Hum was rejected more than 100 times.
Right.
You think you get used to the rejection, but you don't.
No.
You really don't.
Right.
So each time it feels kind of raw and fresh.
Yeah.
So I'm preparing for the rejection again, but I'm not looking forward to it. Yeah. Yes?
One more, if I may. When I was in Johannesburg 5 years ago, a number of people expressed to me the concern that they were disappointed in the ANC after the promise of Mandela, and that maybe they'd sold out to like imperialism and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if you might comment on that.
Yeah, that's very, very true. The last president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, was very much a puppet to what amounted to the South African mafia. He signed off on a nuclear power plant that South Africa did not need, and fired the finance minister when he wouldn't sign off on the nuclear power plant. Put someone in place for one day, got him to sign off, and then fired them the next day. So there's a lot of promises that the ANC hasn't delivered on. At the same time, I can understand why the majority in South Africa keeps voting for the ANC despite this, because the distrust of white people is naturally very, very high. But South Africa now has a new president of the ANC and a new president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's kind of old school like Nelson Mandela was. And, you know, South Africans really, really hoping that he's going to turn it around as much as he possibly can. So I live in eternal hope for South Africa's future. Yes?
Having grown up in South Africa, how did you adjust to the climate and total different lifestyle in Toronto?
Yeah. It was wonderfully liberating, because Toronto is such a diverse city, so diverse, and not just in terms of race, but in terms of religion, in terms of sexuality. Whereas I didn't realize how prejudiced, well, I knew South Africa was prejudiced because of apartheid, but when you are in it and you're brainwashed to it, you're too close to it to see it properly. Which is why I would never have written the Hum If You Don't Know the Words if I was still living in South Africa. I needed to leave South Africa in order to write that book. So it was wonderfully liberating to live in a society, in a city that was just so diverse. It took a lot of getting used to and a lot of adjustments. But yeah, it was wonderful, and it helped me see South Africa more clearly. It helped me put South Africa in perspective more clearly, and it's something you don't realize when you are raised to be so racist, when you are brainwashed like that. It creeps into your thoughts. It's so pervasive into your thoughts that it takes every single day of your life to adjust that thinking, because you think in a certain way without understanding why you think that way, and without giving it much thought. We all just think our opinions are formed, but they're not. They've been taught to us so much as we've grown up. And that's the wonderful thing about Toronto, is it's challenged me every single day, so that when I think certain things, when I hold certain prejudices, I challenge myself. And that has been the wonderfully liberating thing, because it's a lifelong task.
If there are no more questions, we can move it over to the signing if you've purchased a book. If not, there are still some copies available in the back. Thank you all. Thank you.